Okay, question. Why don't youth pitchers throw sliders? Right? So, when I work with young pitchers, it's extremely rare that they will ever come to me saying I throw a slider. Maybe like 1 out of 20 is my guess. And yet, in pro baseball, I would guess probably 2/3 of guys throw a slider as their primary breaking ball. So the question is, the curveball was like the pitch throughout like the early 1900s, I guess, probably up until like the 80s or 90s when the sliders started to become more popular. I think when velocity started to come up a little bit. I don't exactly know when the trend shifted, but I know it did shift at some point. I was actually talking on Twitter to an analyst about it, and he was referencing a book about how the book said three was an off-speed pitch, and my comment to him was that must be pretty old. Like, how old is it? Because as far as my career has always gone, three has always been the universal sign for slider. He said the book was like, I think, 1989. So I think somewhere in that like 80s, 90s is when the slider moved prominent enough to become its own pitch, worthy of one of the first, one, fast curve, wiggle change, three slider, whatever. But anyway, but the thing is, it's weird because youth pitchers don't get taught sliders. It's not like you have your 12U team and, hey, guys, we're going to learn a slider today. You learned a curveball, right? But yet, when you get to college, most guys throw sliders instead of curveballs. And when you get to pro ball, most guys throw sliders instead of curveballs. And I think the reason's a couple. Number one, I learned a curveball at 15, and it was good. It was the only reason I continued my career. My coach said I quote unquote had the best curveball he'd seen in 20 years when he recruited me, and I got a chance to walk on to a small Division One. But I was just really lucky. And as I got older and the strike zone got smaller and smaller and smaller, it became really hard for me to throw a curveball for a strike. And that's not an excuse. It's just I wasn't good enough to throw it for a strike when the strike zone got to the little shoebox size that it was in my last couple years. So I think, number one, that becomes a limiting factor. It's extremely hard to throw a curveball as hard as you see it on TV. The guys that throw curveballs, the curveball seems like it's coming back a little bit now. I think there's guys with more amazing curveballs than ever. They can throw them in like the 80s, which is insane. But it's still extremely hard because of the bigger break to throw it for a strike. Umpires give up on it when it's up. They don't call it when it's up. And a slider seems to be a lot more forgiving of a pitch where, sure, when you do hang a slider, it will stay in the middle of the plate and guys will destroy it. But it's a lot easier to throw it for a strike, it appears. Curveball, when you leave it a little bit behind, it's nowhere close to the strike zone. That's why like the release point is very finicky to drop a curveball into the strike zone where an umpire's happy with it. That curveball that does cross the top of the zone that falls in like here, umpires just hate that pitch because they see it coming up and then going down, they call it a ball. So the little strike zone for a curveball guy it really is like a shoebox, like a slim shoebox. Whereas for slider guys, it seems like it's a little bit bigger. The ball starts and stays in the zone a little bit longer. So, but it's weird that we only teach youth kids, for the most part, curveballs. When my big philosophy is, not everyone's suited for a curveball. If you're a lower arm slot guy, and certainly there's examples, Craig Kimbrell throws a quote unquote curveball, does have top to bottom action. He's a lower arm slot guy. Pedro threw a curveball, lower arm slot guy, but most lower, especially like Chris Sale, Madison Bumgarner, and then a little bit higher, like three-quarter, low three-quarter, a little bit above sidearm. Those guys, they're not going to be suited real well for a curveball because we've got to get all our fingers pretty much to the front of the ball so that it's here, and then we're tilting it forward so we get that forward 12-6 or 1-7 spin. That's how we have a good, sharp curveball. And so when you have a lower arm slot, it makes it tougher for you to get to the front of the baseball. That's why those guys become slider guys. They can just get a little bit to the front and spin it, and then they throw that slider. So lower arm slot guys are almost always slider, sinker, changeup guys. Higher arm slot guys can still be fastball, slider, four-seamer guys, or they can also be fastball, curveball. They can still throw a changeup, obviously, too. But when you're up top, you have kind of infinite options. Your ball's just probably not going to sink and run as much. When you're lower, you're just not going to be able to get to the top of the curveball very well. You might still throw one as an amateur. You might still throw a curveball and like, oh, I still throw a curveball. It might suck, though. Like, chances are your curveball probably sucks. So the goal for me as an instructor is always to put you in the right breaking ball for you. And, just like a reputable car salesman might try to find like the right car for you, not just like the one he wants to sell you, but the one that's best for you and your budget and the way you drive and all this sort of stuff. So guys that are usually lower arm slot are usually a slider. Guys that are higher arm slot can be either one. And we kind of go and try it out for a while. We'll try both pitches, and I'll judge the spin and just see like, okay, this kid can spin a slider really well, but he's really struggling to get to the top of it and throw a curveball. Let's go with slider and see how he can develop that and give it a shot. But what we don't want to do is have a kid, and this frustrates me to no end, where we work with a breaking ball all winter, a curveball, for example. He goes up to tryouts, high school baseball, and bounces a couple in his bullpen, and coach goes, oh, let me teach you a slider. Let's go with this. Well-meaning, but look, just because you bounce it, just because it's a work in progress doesn't mean we're going to scrap it. If the spin is there, if I can see that you're spinning it with a good, clean spin axis, you're getting this, not this crappy mixture, then hey, the pitch has potential. We just have to get better at it, just like anything else. Like amateur pitchers don't throw as many strikes as they need to, especially with off-speed stuff. So it's a long learning process, but it's just still weird that like the curveball is the standard to teach a young kid. Let's teach them a slider. There's no difference. If we're going to teach breaking balls to amateur pitchers, which I don't really recommend. I don't teach kids a breaking ball at all until they're a freshman in high school. But if we are, what's wrong with the slider versus the curveball? Might suit a lot of kids better. There's no reason that I can tell. There's no research that says sliders are worse on the arm than curveballs. Breaking balls in general, kids just report more pain when they throw them compared to kids that don't. So I think there's been just a stigma about the slider where it's like, ooh, this scary pitch that's only good for pros. And that might be true, but there's no real hard data about it. But if we teach kids curveballs, it's a weird thing. I'm not advocating for one way or the other. It's just a strange the way things have gone with the fastball curveball, where guys, it seems like as they have a curveball that they've learned throughout their youth, then they make it to college baseball. That's where this shift happens, where they say, basically their coach is like, look, your curveball was good enough for varsity baseball. It's not good enough here anymore. We got to teach you a different breaking pitch. So then they learn the slider. But since no kids grow up with the slider, they're never converting to curveball, right? So it seems like no matter what you come up with, if you did throw a slider in high school, it's probably pretty good if you got to play in college with it. So you already have your slider. And if you're a curveball guy who wasn't very good with it, it seems then they convert you to slider. So everything funnels back to slider. It's never like they're teaching guys curveball in pro ball or in college ball. And certainly I'm sure that happens. I'm not saying no one's ever learned a curveball, because I know there's guys in the big leagues that have learned a curveball and it becomes their best pitch. I think Garrett Cole's a good example of that. But it just seems most of it's the opposite way, where curveball guys get converted into slider guys later on in their career. And it's just a question of why. That's all I got.